Namaste and welcome to Decolonizing Dharma. My name is Prerna Tirvepati and I am an Indic researcher as well as a Dalit activist. I work on the ground with a lot of Dalit communities, women and children particularly. And my today's talk is regarding the caste system that we have here in India. So basically, we're going to break down this talk into explaining what exactly is caste in India, what is Varna, what is Jati, what is Kulam, and regarding the interpolations in our Shastras as well. So most of my work is using various references, primarily from the book I'm going to quote most, from various books. The book I'd be quoting most would be Dalits of Hinduism by my Acharya Sri Sanjeev Meva. So as a person who's grown up, studied and lived abroad most of my life, I will be presenting the etic as well as the emic perspective, the insider and outsider's point of view regarding caste, and my various understandings of what caste is in today's world. So as we all know, caste is foreign to India, to Bharat, and it is basically a European concept. The caste originates from the word casta, the Portuguese word casta. And however, in India, the most commonly used words for caste are Varna and Jati. However, Jati, the original Sanskrit meaning of the word Jati, comes from the Nyaya Sutra. The Nyaya Sutra basically states that Jati is a classification based on the source of origin. I will be referring to my notes over here because some of the words are in Sanskrit. So Jati basically means Samana Prasavatmika Jatihi, or those having similar birth source. That's the meaning of the word Jati. So Jati can be classified according to our rishis into 4 major categories. One is Udbija, that is coming out of the ground like plants. Andaja, coming out of eggs like birds and reptiles. Pindaja, which is mammals, including human beings, and Ushmaj, which means reproducing due to temperature and ambient conditions like virus and bacteria. So this is the actual meaning, Sanskrit meaning from the Nyaya Sutra of the word Jati. However, because of the prevalence and the word being used commonly by the people, Jati now also means caste. But originally, this was the meaning of the word Jati. Varna. Varna is what is the actual classification of the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and the Shudra into 4 categories. So that actually is Varna. And that's what we use in Sanatana Dharma is Varnashrama Dharma. So the word Varna is not only used for these 4 Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, it's also used for Dasyu and Arya. Varna basically means that which is adopted by choice, while Jati is provided by God. So you can't change the way you were born, as in Udbija, Andaja, Pindaja, or Ushmaj, as in, like a plant, a bird, reptile, mammals, and bacteria or viruses. So a lot of times the word that was used to denote caste was the word Arya Varna. Arya is somebody who is respected or is learned, whereas Dasyu Varna is somebody who is in servitude. Dasyu, that is the common meaning of it. So Varnashrama Dharma, the word Varna itself implies that it is based on complete freedom of choice and meritocracy. Those involved in intellectual activities belong to the Varna of the Brahmin. Those in defense and warfare were categorized under the Kshatriya Varna. And those in economics and animal rearing, etc., came under the Vaishya Varna. And those who were involved in the support functions came under the Shudra Varna. As per the Vedas, these four Varnas, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, represent four basic properties. Various human behaviors can be explained in the form of different combinations of these basic properties. These vary at every point within the same individual as well. Vary as per the field of investigation being chosen as well. So the Yajurveda 32.16 specifically says, my Brahmin and my Kshatriya qualities be worthwhile. This is the English translation. Every human has all four qualities of Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra within him or her. And for the sake of simplicity, we tag them under their most predominant profession. Now, India, the reason we are discussing this decolonizing dharma is because India has been cliched into, caste, cow, and curry, and most of the allegations that are laid on Hinduism can be divided into three broad categories: allegations based on historic texts and events, allegations based on our religious texts or shastras like and itihasas like Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Puranas, Shrutis, and the Sutras, Sutras and the Smritis, and allegations based on the Vedas. So these are the three major allegations. So one thing that we all need to understand is India has been, invaded by the Turks and later on by the Europeans, and the colonization that India has faced has led to a lot of interpolations, and most of our texts were also burned down by these various Islamic and European invasions. Most authors of these Sanskrit texts and English translations are modern day, what we have today, are either Max Muller, Griffith, or Monier Williams. If you review their other works, you will find clear reasons for absurdities in their translations. They were paid British employees in an era of British rule with clear motive to portray Hinduism in a bad light. Monier had written explicitly that his agenda is to promote Jesus in India. Many of them based their translations on works of medieval era scholars like Sayanacharya, who worked in the era of Islamic invasions. So if you meticulously study the concept of caste and you look at each and every allegation, you find some of these quite preposterous. Even if you go through the 20,000 plus mantras in the four Vedas, there is nothing objectionable there regarding caste or varna or jati or anything like that. And also, I will be speaking briefly about few of our Hindu texts like the Purusha Sukta, the Manusmriti, the Bhagavad Gita, and also we will discuss the Chaturvarnyam, which is along with examples of caste interchangeability and variations as well. So often mantras of the Purusha Sukta are cited to prove that there's been a hierarchy in the caste, that Brahmins originated from the mouth, Kshatriyas from the hands or arms, Vaishyas from the thighs, and Shudras from the legs of God. So, and this is quite deceptive, and a lot of people now believe that Varnas are birth-based. But if you have a look at this very closely, How can a god take the shape of a gigantic person if he is actually, shapeless? Because we believe in, the omnipresence of Bhagwan or God. And also, a very integral part of Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism is karma, the theory of karma. So anyone who is born in a Shudra family can take birth as a king, or a son of a king in their next birth. But if Shudras were born from the feet of God, how can some Shudras again take birth from the hands of God? So some of these philosophical or theological questions will actually show you the flaws in this, current day hierarchy that a lot of people talk about. So in Sanatana Dharma, we believe that the Atma, which is actually a non-translatable but can be loosely translated to soul, we believe that the Atma or the soul is timeless and it was never born. The Atma can have no Varna. The Jivatma takes birth as a human and has the freedom to opt and choose the Varna. So the Purusha Sukta is in the 31st chapter of the Yajurveda, apart from the Rig Veda and Atharvaveda with some variations. In Yajurveda, it is in 31.11. To see what it actually means, let us look at the previous mantra, which is 31.10. It asks a question: who is mouth, who is hand, who is thigh, and who is leg? The next mantra gives the answer: Brahman is the mouth, Kshatriya is the hand, Vaishya is the thigh, and Shudra becomes the legs. We need to note that the mantra does not say that Brahman takes birth from mouth. It says Brahman is the mouth. Because if the mantra would mean takes birth, it would not answer the question, the previous mantra, which is who is mouth. For example, if we ask who is King Dashrata, an answer like Rama is born from Dashrata is actually meaningless. So what this actually means, what the Purusha Sukta verse actually means is, in society, Brahmins or intellectuals from the brain, head or mouth that think and speak, Kshatriyas or defense personnel from the hands that protect, Vaishyas or producers and businessmen from the thighs that support and nurture. Note that the thigh bone or femur produces blood and is one of the strongest bones. In the Atharvaveda, instead of using uru, the Sanskrit word uru or thigh, the word madhya is used, meaning that it also denotes the stomach and central part of the body. Shudra or labor force forms the legs that lay the foundation and make the body run. The next mantras talk of other parts of the body like the mind, the eyes. The Purusha Sukta describes the origin and continuation of creation, including human society, and states ingredients of a meaningful society. It is pity that such a beautiful allegoric description of society and creation is distorted to mean something that is completely contrary to our Vedic ethos. Even the texts like, controversial texts like the Manusmriti, or even the Itihasas, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, or even the Bhagavata Purana, do not state anything even close to the crazy hypothesis of God creating Brahmins by tearing the flesh from his mouth, Kshatriyas from the flesh of his hands, or so on. So it is obvious why Brahmins are accorded highest respect in the Vedas. That is the same what happens in modern society. Scholars and experts get our utmost respect because they form the they are the direction providers to the entire humanity. Also, a small disclaimer. I am in no way trying to deny that there is the existence of caste discrimination or caste atrocities like I'd mentioned earlier, I work very closely with the Dalit community, and I belong to the Dalit community myself. I deal with a lot of these atrocity cases, and I also perform a lot of ghar wapsis, which is like the reconversions, people who have left Hinduism or who are atheists. I help them come back and embrace Sanatana Dharma again. So in the Vedic culture, everyone is considered to be born as a Shudra. It's only based on his or her education. One becomes a Brahmin, Kshatriya, or a Vaishya based on their education and the profession that they choose, or what they choose to upgrade themselves to. Because I can also quote to you quite a few examples where there is an exchange or one person born in as a Shudra upgrades himself to another Varna, or can also, if he chooses to be uneducated, can remain a Shudra. So the completion of education is considered to be the second birth. And that is why the three Varnas, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya, are known as Dvija or twice born. But those who remain uneducated for whatever reason are not discarded from society. They continue as Shudras and perform support activities for the society. This is how it was ideally pre-invasions in India. So the son of a Brahmin, for example, if he fails to complete his education, becomes a Shudra. Similarly, a son of a Shudra or even a Dasyu, if he completes his education, can become a Brahmin, Kshatriya, or Vaishya. This was based purely on meritocracy. The Yagnopavit, or the sacred thread that is worn, was provided in the Vedic system. That would mean that anybody who has adorned the Yagnopavitam or the Janeu or the Punal has started their education. That was a sign that they are now, they've started studying. Also, with a lot of the texts, as we had discussed, there's been a lot of interpolation. Now, if we have a look very closely at the interpolations, I can quote you several examples as well as we go further ahead. So it is interesting that texts like the Bhagavad Gita are often misinterpreted as well. For example, the Chaturvarnya Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagashaha from the Bhagavad Gita, the shloka clearly says that the Varna is based on a person's guna or their qualities, their karma or their deeds. And that's what actually the Bhagavad Gita states very clearly, that it is the Varna is based on a person's karma and their guna, their characteristics and their deeds. Also, if we have a look at a few other texts as well, we can see that there are three misconceptions regarding caste. One, that it is birth-based, and division of labor was based on Varna or caste, and also regarding endogamy. So there was a lot of inter-Varna mobility. There are several examples of inter-Varna mobility mentioned in our text, and I will state a few examples. But before that, another important thing that I would like to discuss is regarding the word kulam. Kulam is a common Telugu word It's inspired from the Trivarnika model of the caste system, as Varna eventually failed to practically fit into the later day concept of the caste system, the so-called caste system, which was based on professional hierarchy later on. And that became the prime criterion, labor. So earlier, when there was a lot of cross-country migration of various tribes, this is just during or before the Islamic invasion or the Islamic brutality had actually started. There was a lot of cross-country migration of various tribes who continued to live in close association with other tribes for socioeconomic purposes, and this attributed and led to the conceptualization of the Kulam-based social identification. Soon tribes became Kulams. During the initial phases of Islamic invasion, most tribesmen are believed to have been individualistically skilled in all forms of art and trade, including architecture, agriculture, artisan, leather tannery, weaving, tribal shaman, etc. This is just to name a few. It has been postulated that Kulam originated from the growing demand for a systemized workforce, along with the need to develop a collective social responsibility and harmony. So Kulam is said to have been originated as a social construct with the intent of promoting occupational specialization of tribes in order to sustain the growing need of supplies based on demand. The tribes intended to avoid occupational and trade trespassing and to develop a social model of right come duty. So this is the origin of the word Kulam. So Bharat or India as a nation and Sanatana Dharma as, say, a religion have been severely criticized by Hindu-phobic Western intelligentsia for its concept, practice, and continued prevalence and adherence to the caste system. Indian academicians, particularly, have been peddling this Hindu-phobic narrative to advocate rampant politicization in the name of caste atrocities against the scheduled caste and tribes, the so-called Dalits, in order to pander to their masters in the West who fund them generously. While the concept of caste has retained its cultural continuity, Bharat has also been the land that has given birth to some of the greatest philosophers, thinkers, and social reformers the world has ever witnessed. While the tenets of Hinduism propound the concept of social inclusion, the evil of the caste system and exclusion of women within the Hindu society and Sanatana Dharma cannot be ignored or concealed. However, Sanatana Dharma is non-exclusivist, is not non-exclusive, is not exclusivist. In fact, it's quite the contrary. The core value system embedded deep within Sanatana Dharma reflect the concept of societal inclusion through the philosophy of the Atman, which we had discussed earlier, the Atman or the soul or the Jivatma. Shastras, particularly the Upanishads, form the basis of Vedanta. The Atman or the spiritual self, as explained in Sanatana Dharma, is said to be boundless and does not coerce to upadhis or upadhis as in which include biological, social, psychological, or societal limitations. Upadhis are basically limitations. So the Atman does not have any of these upadhis or limitations. Foundational scriptures of Sanatana Dharma like the Vedas, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita or the Srimad Bhagavatam and numerous other texts exemplify that equanimity and the basis of social inclusion are essentially pre-embedded within Hinduism. A really good example is Megasthenes, who was the Greek ambassador to India around 300 BCE. And he mentions the cultural, social, and administrative glories of India in his book titled Indica. According to this book, there was no caste system in India, but the categorization of profession or work into 7 types. The book dispels caste, theories and the categorization of work depicted in his book Indica is similar to the categorization of labor based on the work as mentioned in the Vedas, known as Varna. I will state a few examples of Varna migration from our ancient historical texts. So, Aitreya Rishi was the son of a dasa or a criminal, but became a Brahmin of the highest order and wrote Aitreya Brahman and Aitreya Upanishad. Aitreya Brahman is considered critical to understanding the Rig Veda. The Aitreya Brahman 2.19 states that Ailush Rishi was the son of a dasi, a gambler, and of low character. However, he researched the Rig Veda and made several discoveries. Not only was he invited by rishis, but was also made an acharya or a guru. The Vishnu Purana 4.1.14 states that Prishad was the son of King Daksha, but became a Shudra. Further, he did tapasya to achieve salvation after repenting. Tapasya is what had allegedly been banned for Shudras, as per the fake story in the Uttara Ramayana, which again has several interpolations. The Vishnu Purana 4.1.13 states that Nabhag, a son of King Nedishta, became Vaishya. Many of his sons again became Kshatriya. As per the Bhagavad, Agni Vaishya became Brahmin, though born to a king. As per Vishnu Purana and Bhagavad, Rathotar, born in Kshatriya family, became a Brahmin. Mahabharata, Anushasan Parva, chapter 3, states that Matanga was the son of a Chandal, but became a Brahmin. Matanga Rishi is a very famous Rishi. Keep hearing his name in several texts. Also, Ravan, the main, the villain in the Ramayana, was born as a Brahmin, the son of Vishrava Rishi of Pulatsya clan, but became a Rakshasa because of his deeds, evil deeds. Trishanku was a Kshatriya king, but he became a Chandal because of his deeds, because of his karma. Pravriddhi was the son of a Raghu king, but he became a Rakshasa again. Whereas Vidura from the Mahabharata was the son of a Dasi, or a handmaid, but became a Brahmin and a minister of the Hastinapur Empire. So there are several examples like this. We could keep going on and on and on. Also, the word Dalit is a socio-political term that is used mostly, in politics. The word Dalit is fairly recent. It came into maximum use after Jyotirba Phule and everybody during Ambedkar and later on. So the word Dalit means being split. The Sanskrit translation of the word Dalit. However, if we have a look at the current Dalit society, the social identity, they are the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes clubbed together are known as the Dalits today in modern day India. But historically, the Dalit social identity was classified into Chandals, Antyajas, Panchamas, and Asprusyas. So, regarding a little bit more about the classification of the Dalits, in the SC community, you have the Malas, Madigas, Relli, Chindu, Mashtila in Telugu, the Paraya and Parayan in Tamil, Mahar and Matang in Marathi. However, today, according to our constitution, we have about 53 subcastes under the SC community itself. The colonial state produced equally demeaning nomenclatures as depressed classes and scheduled castes. The word Dalit as well is quite demeaning. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi patronized Dalits as Harijans, within the larger project of assimilation. Uh, on the other hand, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had a is believed to have had a Muslim disciple who converted to Vaishnavism, and Mahaprabhu had named him Haridas, the servant of Lord Sri Hari. So I'm guessing that Gandhi also used the nomenclature Harijan due to similar mentality or inspiration. In contrast, the identities envisioned and constructed by the Dalits themselves, such as Adi Hindu, Adi Andhra, and so-called Dalits, were imagined as part of their emancipatory struggles. The word Dalit itself stems from a colonial nomenclature, as it came up from movements rooted in Western ideologies such as Marxist and socialist movements, which sees the world through the lens of caste struggle or oppressor and oppressed worldview. Our retired Major General G.D. Bakshi wrote it very well. He said that divide and rule policy adopted by the British, and regarding this, he wrote about it, and I quote him: caste was the primary weapon and fault line the British used to divide and rule India for over 200 years. They did it with a vengeance after the 1857 uprising. In 1872, Sir John Risley held the first caste-based census in India. He said, as long as there'll be caste, there will be no India. So a lot of us are not aware who exactly Risley was. So H. Risley, the president of the Asiatic Society of Bengal and director of the ethnography for India from 1901 to 1909, had an understanding of caste based on anthropometric measures. Under his supervision, caste was implemented in the census in ethnological and anthropometric terms that neutralized and radicalized the category. Risley revised how caste was envisaged in the census. After our independence, after our Indian independence, politicians surpassed the British in using caste for political mobilization. Caste would have withered and died away due to industrialization and urbanization, but our politicians kept it alive. They deepened the caste fault lines by putting tags of reservation on caste identities to deepen them at the cost of the idea of India or Bharat. In fact, the very notion of treating different caste identities as the basis for forming groups can be challenged. Caste itself is a disputed conceptual category in discussing the Indian social context, being imported by British colonial anthropologists with a view to racially categorize, divide, and then ultimately rule over the Indian population. It certainly helped the British colonial agenda, which intimately colluded with the Christian missionary agenda to use caste as a conceptual framework to categorize the Indian population and explain the society, for it yielded certain concrete theoretical advantages for the colonial administration and Christian proselytization of the people of the Indian subcontinent. Contemporary sociologists acknowledge that the requirement for social inclusion of the oppressed arises only when there is a suspicion of their social exclusion. There are several evidences of how the concept of social exclusion was shunned as a sign of spiritual stagnation in Sanatana Dharma. There are also numerous historical testimonies of how caste, a predominant colonial construct, was explicated and perpetuated into academic and public discourse by Christian evangelism, communism, Marxism, and Dravidian identity politics, which look at Indian history only through the lens or the glasses of a disputed historical framework of Aryan Dravidian struggle. The Indian academia post the British independence was usurped by the westernized and elitist Nehruvians to pander to the Marxist ideology. Also, I would like to briefly discuss Annihilation of Caste by Baba Saheb, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So a lot of people state that Baba Saheb had, was very critical of our Indian Shastras, particularly the Manusmriti. Many of the verses in the Manusmriti are misinterpreted, interpolated, and adulterated. For example, Manusmriti verse 10.43 to 44 state that certain castes were earlier Kshatriya but later became Shudra. These verses are adulterated but prove that the concept of Varna migration did exist. The castes mentioned are Paundrak, Audru, Dravid, Kamboj, Yavan, Shak, Parad, Palhava, Chin, Kirat, Darad, Kash. Mahabharata, Anushasana Parva 35.17 to 18 adds the following to the above list. Mekal, Lat, Kanvashira, Shaundik, Darva, Chaur, Shabar, Babar. Also in Sanatana Dharma, we have the concept of the Gotra. Gotras are common across Brahmins, Kshatriya, Vaishyas, and Shudras as well, implying that all of them hail from the same family, but rather got entrapped in the concept of casteism. I would also like to summarize a few points regarding the Shastras here. Point 1, the current Manusmriti is full of interpolated adulterated verses that were added much later for various reasons. Almost 60% of present popular Manusmriti is actually fake. In fact, there is no evidence of the current Manusmriti being authentic apart from a Kolkata manuscript of Manusmriti concocted by British in 1794 through a person called William Jones. There is no other evidence of authenticity of the current Manusmriti than this dubious British text. Also, I would like to mention, as a practicing Hindu, Manusmriti is not a text that any Hindu that at least I have come across in my stay here in India for all these years, Hindus do not keep a copy of the Manusmriti. It's not an essential text or a part of Sanatana Dharma. Point 2, interpolation is not a problem just with the Manusmriti alone. Apart from Vedas, sorry, just a moment, please. Pardon me. Apart from the Vedas that were preserved through a unique Patha and Swara method, all other texts at some point were modified. They have interpolations, and there were also several deletions. These interpolated, deleted, and modified texts include Mahabharata, Ramayana, and of course, that's the same case with the Bible and Quran as well. I'll not even speak about the Bhavishya Puran, that because it keeps getting modified even today with various texts. The 3 editions of Ramayana which are available today are Dakshinatya, Paschamotariya, and Gaudiya, which are different. Even the standard Gita Press Gorakhpur has indicated many chapters as adulterated or prakshipta. That is the term we use for adulterated. Most scholars agree that Balakanda and Uttarakhanda are grossly adulterated. Similarly, with the Mahabharata as well, it is a grossly interpolated text. The Garuda Puran, Brahmakanda 1.59 states that in Kali Yuga, many frauds will pose as Brahmins to remove several shlokas and add new ones. The Mahabharata Shanti Parva 265.9.4 itself states that Vedic texts clearly prohibit alcohol, fish, and meat. All these have been propagated by frauds who have added such verses in scriptures, and that's absolutely deceit. Also, it has been prescribed that the text that the Smriti that we're supposed to refer to in this Kali Yuga is not the Manusmriti, but the Parashara Smriti. Also, Manusmriti, one of the oldest texts on social systems, is also prone to modifications, more so because Manusmriti historically had the great influence in day-to-day life of each citizen as well as politics of the nation. After all, it was like the constitution for centuries. Hence, the incentives for a crooked one to interpolate Manusmriti was very high. Point number 4. When we review Manusmriti, we find 4 kinds of interpolations. 1, to bring completeness. 2, for selfish reasons. 3, to exaggerate. And 4, to bring defects. Most of these interpolations are blatantly obvious. Dr. Surendra Kumar had written a detailed translation of Manusmriti in Hindi that analyzes each shloka on various parameters to weed out those verses that are obviously interpolated. Dr. Surendra Kumar has deduced that 2,685 shlokas of the Manusmriti, out of the 2,685 shlokas of the Manusmriti, at least 1,471 shlokas are adulterated. He has classified the adulterations into 6 broad categories. 1, some of these are out of subject, they are out of context, contradictory, repetitive, different usage and style, and blatantly contradictory to the Vedas. The Vedas form the major text of Sanatana Dharma, whereas the Upanishads and everything else are just, they follow. But the Vedas are the core. Vedas form the core. Also, I recommend everyone to please get a copy of Dr. Surendra Kumar's book, which is published by the Arsha Sahitya Prachar Trust, Delhi. To clarify these points themselves. And point number 5, Dr. Surendra Kumar is not the only person to point out adulterations in Manusmriti. Several Western Indologists like MacDonald, Keith, Buller, etc. have expressed the same. Even Dr. B.R. Ambedkar accepted that ancient scriptures have been adulterated. He had alleged adulterations in Ramayana, Mahabharata, Gita, Puranas, and even Vedas. He cited contradictory verses from Manusmriti, but this is ignored by modern Dalit activists. This myopic act did stir up several anti-Manu movements and created political careers for many politicians. But this selective honesty only worsened the caste-based hatred and made Manu, who was a true hero, into a popular villain. The so-called Arya Samaj sannyasis like Agnivesh have burnt copies of the Manusmriti, and they've disgraced such a great rishi like Manu only for their, to score political brownie points. Swami Dayanand himself of the Arya Samaj had asserted that Manusmriti has been interpolated, but the unadulterated verses of the Manusmriti form the foundation of Swami Dayanand's Vedic ideology. I will quickly summarize a few points or some facts regarding the Manusmriti. The modern Manusmriti was created by British, not by Hindus. They published one Kolkata manuscript in 1794 and imposed upon us as Hindu law. No one knows from where this Kolkata manuscript came from. Even today, all the JNU, popularly known JNU students, are popularly known as the Tukde Tukde gang, and all these, politicians who want to create a caste rift. When they burn the Manusmriti, they actually download the book, make copies of it, Xerox copies of it, and then burn it, because books are not easily available. At least 50 different Manusmriti manuscripts with different verses are available in archives, and there is no way to choose a single one as authentic. The British created Manusmriti that has verses which denigrate women and lower castes. The one that communists burn in JNU, AMU, and other commie rabbit holes is actually this one. Ironically, the same Manusmriti has an ample number of verses that oppose casteism and speaks about the upliftment of women to a status higher than men, with full freedom. There has been no evidence of any punishment meted to anyone in Indian history on the basis of Manusmriti. And like I said, 99.9% of Hindus do not have a Manusmriti at home. It is rarely published because none apart from British, communists, and other casteists are interested in it. Manusmriti has been used as a weapon by Marxists to demonize Sanatana Dharma, and the word Manuvadi is used as a slur to malign the entire Indian population, the Hindu population particularly. When the average Hindu does not even own a copy of the Manusmriti or even have a remote idea about what is written in the Manusmriti, how do these woke activists, categorize the entire Hindu populace as Manuvadis? That's not even fair. There are several smritis in Sanatana Dharma like Parashara Smriti, Yajnavalkya Smriti, and several other smritis. Besides this, we also have the Vedangas, the Upanishads, the Itihasas, the Puranas, and numerous texts. We are not a singular book-based religion like any of the Abrahamic faiths. So please stop demonizing us on this Manusmriti. So this has been my talk so far. So I hope you've found this helpful. If you guys would like any more references, I would be happy to provide them. Thank you. Namaste.